Hello, you naughty little lot. This week we are back in Italy, third part of my consistent series we've uploaded for the first time in probably about 3 years. And we're going to be looking at perspective. We've done that before on this channel. That video's up here in the link. But this one we're really going in deep on perspective, and 1-point perspective in particular. We're back in the north of Italy this time. Let's jump into the video. For those of you who don't know who I am, my name is James Kerwin, and this is me. I'm an architecture and interior photographer from the UK, and I love shooting abandoned places, relics, ruins, hidden gems and ghost towns, as well as off the beaten path locations all around the world. I'm posting new videos every Sunday, so why don't you join me for the ride by subscribing. You can also check out my website in the description below. Okay, welcome to Piedmont in northern Italy. We're inside an abandoned religious school, I believe, and we're going to be looking at the 1-point perspective. And we've chosen the upper floor of this building. There's a beautiful hall on the top floor, and it makes for a perfect composition using this technique. Okay, so perspective correction is really a key component in an architecture photographer's tool bag. It's literally the most important thing you need to be competent at when you're photographing architecture. The control of vertical perspective is in essence the alignment of the verticals of the building and how your eye sees them. The control of vertical perspective is in essence the control of getting the verticals correct in a building. And in this tutorial, we're going to be looking at both that as well as how we shoot the 1-point perspective. What is the 1-point perspective and more? So I'd go as far as to say that the 1-point perspective makes up around about 85% of my entire portfolio. In fact, if you open up any architecture magazine or editorial and look through the pages, you'll notice that this go-to perspective is used time and time again. However, is it easy to shoot? And the answer to that is no, as you're going to see. It's all about making sure you're fine-tuning your composition to nail that perspective. Okay, so what is a 1-point perspective? Well, a photograph has a 1-point perspective when it has a vanishing line on the horizon, where your eye is naturally drawn to, usually in the center of the image. Usually all lines point to that central horizon point, the vanishing point. This type of perspective is usually used for things like roads, railway lines, or of course, buildings, interiors, such as this. So at this point, most people know that tilt-shift lenses are great at stopping vertical lines from converging. Shooting a 1-point perspective straight down the middle is very misleading. People look at it and think, oh, that's easy, it's just straight down the middle, it's a simple shot. But that couldn't be more misleading. Actually, fine-tuning and getting these compositions spot on, the 1-point perspective takes years to master. And really, even now, I'd say even after 8 years of photographing this kind of architecture, I'm still just a novice. I still get it wrong sometimes, and of course we all do make mistakes, but it's all about limiting those mistakes and cracking down on those compositions. I can spend like 5 to 10 minutes pacing up and down the room. I did it here in this hallway when I shot this. Just this morning, I photographed the hall myself for the first time. And I paced up and down here 5 or 10 minutes, lining up my tripod, lining up my camera, positioning it, moving it, thinking, oh, is the ceiling straight? Fine-tuning it is really, really important. And that is the key to nailing this compositional technique. When I say I paced up and down the room, I don't just mean I walked up and down looking for a shot. I probably spent 5 or 10 minutes visualizing the composition, working out the alignment of the tripod in the center of the room. I also tried to visualize, is the walls straight? Is the ceiling straight? Is there actually a neat 1-point perspective to produce? I think it's pretty hard to nail with a ball head, and I recommend using something like this. This is a geared head. There's many on the market now. There's ones by Benro, there's ones by Cube, the brand Cube. There's also this one here by Sunway Photo. This is the GH Pro 2, which I've had now for around about 10 months-ish. These allow you to fine-tune your compositions. They allow each of the access to be individually controlled, and that means that when it comes to the 1-point perspective, you can nail your composition, or at least give yourself a helping hand with one of these. So in this segment, we're going to be using 2 lenses and take 2 different images. First of all, I'm going to be using the 15-35 that's on that camera right there to shoot one particular image, and then I'm going to shoot with a tilt shift lens, 17mm tilt shift. It's going to give us a panoramic that we're going to then blend together in post-processing. I think in this particular version, the 15-35mm shot, I'm going to look for a landscape orientation. I think that's going to look quite nice. Okay, so the 1-point perspective, how are we going to achieve this in camera? Well, you would have seen me in the kind of intro positioning my camera dead center and fine-tuning where really the tripod is sitting, walking away, standing back, looking at the lines in the ceiling, looking at the floor markings to see if there's anything that will give me an advantage and help me out in terms of lining and placement of the tripod into position. This one room is difficult. It's difficult for a number of reasons, because actually some of the markings are not actually straight on the ceiling. Also, with a 15 or 35, things are quite difficult to line up. It stretches and bends the edges, in particular the columns and the walls behind me just over here. I've also tried to bring myself to a position where I think it complements the landscape orientation. So there's light pouring in this window here that I'm using to film, of course, so that's kind of playing its role. I kind of prefer this section here, although I don't have the height. However, with a little bit of patience, I have lined up a composition. Ideally, I would actually put my tripod even higher than this, maybe balance it on a table, something around this height here, and that would give me more of an advantage. But I've lined things up. We're going to look at it in camera and see what it's looking like. So what we're looking at here is my absolute composition, nailed down and try to fine-tune that 1-point perspective. But there's one really important factor here, and that is that we've got no leaning or converging verticals. What do I mean by that? Well, if you're shooting with a wide-angle lens, the natural habit is to be able to shoot more of that ceiling and shoot it up here, and this is the ceiling. But look what happens to our walls if our camera is not in a flat, horizontal, straight position. So what I mean by that is, if we bring it back down here, our lines straighten out. And yes, we're sacrificing lots of the ceiling to obtain that shot, but that is how we photograph architecture. Now we have a choice then. We can either bring our camera further back, give ourselves more distance to work with, or we can use a tilt shift lens and actually pull some of that ceiling detail into our composition. Okay, so what I did here, a little lesson, is I slowed down. I looked at the overall composition, the scene. I was too close. So what I've decided to do is retreat my camera back, pull it further back. That then gives me, with the wide angle, more ceiling, more sides, and a better overall composition, because what I've got is I've got more of that colour, more of the pop, and I've framed things up quite nicely. Let's have a look in camera and I'll show you what I mean. Okay, so this is my new composition. I like it much more. The light coming in adds a little bit of drama. We've got kind of like, you can see details in the ceiling. We've got enough height now to be able to maintain the landscape orientation. And of course, we've got our lines nice and straight and a balance throughout the photograph. One thing you can do as well while you're trying to line up and fine tune a 1-point perspective, or actually really any architecture photo, especially when you're using the wide angle, is you have the ability to zoom. So here, if I'm sitting at 15mm, of course, this is my framing. If I zoom in, you'll notice that on the edge of the frame, if we watch here, get the lines of the edge of our frame, as I zoom in, the building should be nice and straight throughout each focal length. So here we're going through, we've got, again, same thing, Same thing, and that's now at 35 mil, so that's our maximum. Pretty much there, we're lined up all the way throughout. So when I then pull it back to 15 mil, I know that everything throughout the scene is pretty straight. So I'm going to photograph this. I think we're good to go. Okay, so next up we're going to look at framing up a 1-point perspective, but this time utilising my 17mm tilt shift lens, and it is an f4 and it is manual focus, as I've mentioned before, but let's try and frame something up together. So there, you saw me, I just literally left my tripod in position and I put my 17mm tilt shift on the front of here. The EF to RF adapter has been implemented to be able to get the tilt shift lens on the front of my Canon R5. The first thing to bear in mind when shooting with a tilt shift is you need to, there's two types of buttons on the front here. There's the locking pin on the right hand side where you unlock the lens. It has the ability to obviously, of course, tilt and shift, hence the name. And what we're mostly looking at for this example is to shift the lens. So what we want to do is shift the lens up or down or left or right, depending on what we want to do, to be able to incorporate more of what our subject is onto our sensor, and that's the aim here. So on the right hand side, there's a locking pin. We're going to unlock that. And on the left hand side here, there is then a rotating pin that allows us to either lift or drop the lens. So the first thing that I'd say we need to do is we need to make sure that we're flattening out our lens, starting it in the central position. I don't recommend ever starting it at the bottom or the top or off center. So check that your lens has been recentered and then you're kind of good to go. So that's the thing to bear in mind. So here, my settings are pretty much going to be the same. Sharpest point of the tilt shift lens, f8, ISO 100, light's pretty nice. That gives us an exposure of 0.8 seconds. I'm doing 3 brackets, one just over 0, and then 3, minus a stop each on the next 2. And it's pretty good. I'm focusing in the same place. The only difference is between a mirrorless and a DSLR. You might be using a DSLR. If it is, what you're going to need to do is press the zoom key and zoom right in and magnify it into your framing, and then fine-tune your focus using the front element of the lens here. I, of course, do the same with a mirrorless camera. I fine-tune with the manual focus part, but the difference is that I have the ability to use focus peaking in camera, and I have 2 activated. I have the one that allows the screen to go red where which parts are in focus, but because this room is quite red and orange, I've also got the ability to have the little green hands, and what they do is they allow me to basically fine-tune the focus, and as it gets in focus they come closer together until they eventually meet and become green when focus is achieved. You can move that about, of course. You can focus wherever you feel is fit. At f8 most of this should be in focus right the way throughout. So the big differences here is we're going to look at photographing the central scene, then we're going to shift the lens to the top, and then we're going to check it at the bottom. And normally what I do is I move the lens and check it all before I shoot anything. And the reason for that is there's nothing worse than shifting up and then realizing that some of your frame is completely off or something isn't working. So you can just move the lens up and throughout, and obviously on my viewfinder here I can see what I'm doing. I could just check all of my framing, top, middle and bottom, and make sure that everything's lined up. I really like this shot. I'm probably going to go with it. We've got to go, we're focused, and we're shooting on middle bracket. 2-second timer is activated. Of course, that means that the brackets will work automatically, which they've just done. I'm then going to unlock on the right-hand side, so using this side, unlock pin, and then we're going to use the shift the lens all the way up, right to the top, and then just back a tiny bit so we don't get any warping or bending. Just check my focus, that should be fine. It is on this particular one. Sometimes on the top it is because the height isn't too much in the building. I'm just going to shoot that one. Don't touch the exposure, even if it changes in camera. It's just because the lens is now bent and the light differs. I think that looks good. And now when we put it to the bottom, the floor should finally line up correctly. And it does. Much better. But our focus is off, so let's just adjust that. I'm going to shoot that one as well. I'm taking it right to the bottom, and the reason why I've taken it right to the bottom, I know I said don't with the top, but that's because I don't want any warping or out of focus areas. At the bottom I don't care because we're probably going to crop some of that floor when we get our ratio right in post-processing. So that's that. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to retake some shots, but this time with the door closed. That means that my exposure time should increase, be longer, because it's going to be darker in here. And that also means filming will become difficult. So setting up and composing a one-point perspective is one of the most important tools that you can have in your arsenal as an architecture photographer. It's all about getting in practice and remembering the previous lesson to slow down when you're composing those images. So I hope you've enjoyed that video. A great one to show perspective with that nice hallway. The colours in there are great. It's a well photographed location, but I think it emphasised the point about perspective and trying to line things up in camera. We've talked about that a lot in this series, and we're going to be doing more. We've got a few more parts to come from Italy. So, got any comments, leave them below, subscribe, hit the bell notification. You'll be alerted next week, of course, then when I upload. And look, 3 weeks in a row, I promised you it was coming. I'm trying. Keep with me. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. Bye for now.